Much, Zev. Can you hear me now, Zev?
I can hear you, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay.
So I want to reflect. You wrote, I think, a very moving piece. And by the way, I'm impressed with your writings, and I think you are not afraid to articulate and take strong positions because that's what being a rabbi in today's day and age is about, what leadership is all about. And you were very clear regarding the Chaim Walder situation. And you said, I could have ignored it, I could have sensationalized it, you can blame other people, but you went through it and you spoke about the impact. So perhaps you can share with our audience the major points of what you wrote and what the reaction has been to your piece.
Well, the major point I wrote is number one. It seems unfortunately clear that the allegations certainly have a substantial and honestly, as best as we can, credible. Number two, obviously, is this idea, which is somewhat, I think, was ignored, to validate and to identify and to support the victims. As you mentioned correctly, Zev, the older allegations go back 25 years, and the most recent go back 6 months. So, therefore, I think those were, and obviously, the point of re-emphasizing again and again with our children and with ourselves as parents, protecting our children.
That's that's the main thing, of course, is protecting our children. And if people don't realize the impact that it has, we'll get to that in just a few moments. But perhaps let's go through the rabbinic calculations, because Haaretz newspaper in Israel is writing that the rabbis are backtracking. They're from what they originally came out, challenging Chaim Walder for his allegations of abuse over the years. So what is going on? Because he did have a large funeral. He committed suicide. They're talking about releasing his book so you can read it again. Is there a shift where, for the last couple of weeks, where we had, whether it's your TED or the other publications, other Haredi media, were challenging and took a very strong and courageous stand? Are they backtracking now?
I mean, obviously, I'm not a spokesman for the Haredi media. I want to make that clear. I can't answer if they're backtracking or not, but I do want to say that as of present, I am not aware of any rabbinic personality of any sort of authority or any sort of position of authority who has denied publicly any of the allegations brought against him. I've seen those who felt that perhaps the issue could have been dealt with differently, perhaps not in a public manner, perhaps that, but I haven't seen anybody, and nor have I seen anything in the Haredi media, not when it first broke, nor now, where anybody has blanketly just said these things are not true. I haven't seen anything on that. So I think what you mentioned as far as the funeral and the such, I think that's I think that's a separate issue where, especially now that the man is dead, and especially now that there is an almana, a widow, and there are Yusomim orphans, so that, and they do live in Bnei Brak. I think obviously that was a little bit of a game changer of how to publicly react. But as far as his actions, I am not aware of anyone who has come out anywhere in the Haredi or any other world who has come out to deny the allegations.
I don't think they're denying the allegations, but they're, as you said, they may be challenging how it was done. They're saying that he should have appeared before a court of Jewish law, a Bezdin. They seem to be backtracking as far as how he was portrayed in the media, and they seem to be taking a different stand. That's what it seems. And I mentioned Haaretz, a newspaper in Israel, did a story about that just the other day.
Uh-huh. Look, I'm not aware of every story in Haaretz. I want to point out one at the beginning. I think I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the man who broke the story is a man, Rabinowitz, who works for Haaretz. I just want to clarify, if you look up his credentials, he originally worked for Kikar Shabbos. Kikar Shabbat is it is one of the primary Haredi websites. He has genuine, bona fide Haredi credentials. He obviously took the position of Haaretz as any other person would take a position for Parnassa, for his support. So he himself is a Haredi individual, an ultra-Orthodox individual. He mentioned that they wrote an article about why he wrote the article, which I thought was really required reading. He said that after an unfortunate incident, the head of Zaka, Meshi Zahav, serious allegations were brought against him. He said the next person that this brought up was CW, that CW was the first and foremost calls that came in. He also writes how he went over and over and over, and they even only decided to go with 3 women of different ages to support the allegations. So I'm not aware of the analysis, but again, I don't see any backtracking in that the facts haven't changed. Yes, I know if you're referring to the this eulogy, which was printed in one of the main Haredi media organs, Yated Ne'eman, where the epitaph, blessed are the righteous, the memory of the righteous to a bracha, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, that I don't think at all I'm alone or some sort of a major stan who were shocked by the use of that epitaph. Honestly, what everyone wants to make of the man, honestly, even before his tragic suicide, I mean, he was not known in any shape, form of a Torah scholar. He was not known for any shiurim. He was not a Rosh Yeshiva. I mean, even before the allegation, he was sort of obviously a fine man before anyone knew, but he was not anybody who was consulted on halachic matters or quote unquote das Torah. So I was a little, I wasn't the only one, frankly, in the entire world that was quite shocked by the epitaph of Zatzal applied to his name. But again, I really don't think that was a backtrack in the recognition of the credibility and the truthfulness of the severity of the allegations brought against him. I think it was more of a way of closing an extremely uncomfortable subject within the local community.
But there are some that all of a sudden I'm hearing, and this is grassroots. This is not scientific. I haven't done a survey or a poll, but there seems to be some more support for him now that he's dead than previously. I'm sensing that.
Well, honestly, as you said, we haven't done like quote unquote a scientific report, but whether that's true or whether it's not true, I spoke in my shul Friday night to, thank God, a large crowd, and I opened by saying I have no interest, nor do I think there's anything useful in bashing or in broad stroking a community and being critical of a certain community. As in any other community, there are, be it from the left wing of the modern Orthodox to the whatever quote unquote right wing of the ultra Orthodox world. Obviously, there are different reactions. I think it's too simplistic to put them into some sort of small window. So honestly, if there are certain voices which are, as you called it, now voicing support, I don't think that's the issue here. I don't think the issue is whether the Haredi media is now backtracking really is so, at least for us here in America, so relevant to the severity of the issue and what we can do or what we should do or how we should view this as a wake-up call for protection in our society. If they believe there in Bnei Brak that they have a way of dealing with it, whether I disagree or I agree, honestly, I fail to see the relevance or the necessity for me to comment on that.
So let me ask you this. Should one read, I think he has close to 80 books, if I'm not mistaken, and they're good books. They were bestsellers over a long period of time. Should one be allowed to read his books considering the situation? I'm curious to get your perspective.
So my personal opinion was very strong and emphatic that the answer is no. One should not only not read his books, I was very emphatic that one should discard the books. I thought this idea, which some people forwarded to me that there were book burnings. I found that a little bit despicable. It was too reminiscent, as we all know, of past anti-Semitic events in our history, and I think honestly was making, to a certain extent, a something comical. We're going to have a public book burning, but I did feel the book. I felt very strongly the book should not be read. I felt very strongly the books should be discarded, totally not donated to libraries nor given over to other people. I felt that they should be whatever placed in the recycle and whatever one has and discarded totally. And the reason is the primary reason is because of the victims. That if you, not just a victim of CW, but even a victim, which there are too many for us to even realize, of sexual assault, they will see the book, and that is a trigger, and that is frankly just something that is painful to them. I gave the analogy: imagine a murderer of a relative of somebody happened to also write a good book, but he was a murderer of a person's relative. When they came over to your house, I think it would be quite not just impolite. I think it would be quite hurtful and quite insulting and quite malicious to keep the book on the shelf, that they would notice that you read, you condone the book of a person who reminds them of something so painful. Any person who is a survivor of sexual abuse, and there are everywhere. I doubt you will gather 15 Jews together where somebody in that group is not a survivor of some sort of sexual abuse. They will see that book and they will interpret that, or certainly potentially interpret that, as a support, a validation, condoning him, and his work. So that is a primary reason, just identification with the victims, which I felt the books must be discarded. Second of all, I also felt, given the extreme nature of his duplicitous behavior and his almost, I guess we would call it, psychotic, schizophrenic dual personality, it's hard for me to imagine that embedded between the lines is not some of his perniciousness, which I imagine would come out, even though I know for years nobody has necessarily pointed it out. But now that it has been revealed, I mean, we even have a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that if a non-believing Jew, an apostate, wrote a Sefer Torah, that Sefer Torah may not be utilized for the public reading of the Torah, notwithstanding the fact that it may be written in perfect calligraphic form. So to over here, I think that the book itself is written by a person who certainly, whatever you are, be it from the modern Orthodox left to the ultra-Orthodox on the right, certainly does not represent in any way, shape, or form not just Torah ideals, but basic universal human morality.
So let me ask you this question, because this is a much broader issue. If somebody committed a crime, and we see that in American culture, look at Bill Cosby and others, when they were convicted, so they stopped running their movie series, their TV series, etc. So if one commits a crime and is convicted, should we just ignore whatever good they may have contributed in the past?
So obviously, that's an excellent question. Obviously, normally the answer is, of course, no. This cancel culture, which has become very prominent in America nowadays, you do one thing and that's it. Everything good you've done, you sent one email, which there was a reference, some sort of awkward racial or sexist reference, cancels out a 40-year career. Obviously, I think that's absurd. But I think we also agree that if I came to someone's house and I noticed they had Mein Kampf on the shelf and they told me, well, there are insightful ideas that Hitler, Yamach Shemo, that his memory should be obliterated, that there are some insightful ideas in Mein Kampf, I think we all agree that that's already crossing the red line. of, notwithstanding he may have some insightful ideas. Where the line is drawn, I agree with you. That's a very difficult. And by the way, in that reason, Zev, I want to be clear. When they asked me in my shul, I said, "This is not. I am not answering as far as this meat is kosher or this meat is not kosher. It's not a black white. Yes, it's my strong rabbinic opinion. However, it's not a halakhically clear issue. I think even morally, it's not a halakhically. You mentioned Mr. Cosby before. Growing up, I must admit that I enjoyed his television series that he had. They were, funny. They were clean. However, when it came out that the abuse was rampant over decades, and you're talking about, I don't recall now, but 2 to 3 dozen, if not more, women who were victimized by this man. So I do believe that would cross the red line. On the other hand, I don't know, a person who maybe had one offense 30 years ago and since that time has lived unstained life and regretted what they did. If you remember, I imagine you do, the famous book I believe it's by Leon Uris, QB7, I believe, it deals with just that question of a man who was involved in the Holocaust, a doctor, and the good he did after versus the evil he did before. So I don't know. In this situation, but I'm saying because of the trigger effect, I just felt that the book should not be on the bookshelf. But I also want to add on, I'm not the ultimate judge, but I don't discard or I don't disregard or I don't ignore that he gave, including myself, enjoyment in reading his presentation. Remember, again, I don't want to glorify, but he did create this new genre where the protagonist was the child, it's him or herself, which was really groundbreaking in Haredi literature, where the classic literature was always presented as a man in a long white beard was the protagonist you were being told of his righteousness, his tzidkus, his piousness. And all of a sudden he created this new genre, which is a good genre, of the child being the protagonist, the child struggling, the child having the challenge. It certainly resonated, especially in our 21st century, irrespective if you live in Bnei Brak or you live in Boston. But nevertheless, recognizing that, and obviously God will be the ultimate judge. I have no reason, God forbid, at this point, any personal vendetta, God forbid, not against his family, certainly his wife, his parents were still alive. But I felt the books should still not be in one's home, if nothing less, because of the trigger effect to any victims of sexual assault. And also, I do believe that perhaps between the lines, there are messages which could be negative to the reader.
So you're saying that you may be some subtle messages in his work that now that we know what kind of a person he was, that's hidden in there, that maybe have some pernicious effect on people reading it?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd even in the room hidden. If these, like I said, these allegations, I heard an interview with Reb Shmuel Eliyahu. I think it's clear. I don't think anybody even doubts this as well. Reb Shmuel Eliyahu, as the expression goes, has no skin in the game. Reb Shmuel Eliyahu is I believe, a Sephardic Rav who lives in Sfas, who is a more associated with the religious Zionist camp. I don't think, he doesn't hobnob with Bnei Brak rabbinic officials necessarily. He doesn't live there. He doesn't live any close to there. His background, Bnei Brak, which is known as strongly as stronghold of Ashkenazic Jewry, be it Hasidic, be it Litvish, Lithuanian. He's a Sephardic Rav, the son of a Sephardic chief rabbi, who lives in Sfas, a very more mystical type of a place. He has no skin in this game. I have no reason to doubt him. He's not making money on this, that's for sure. He's probably receiving death threats, I imagine. And I have no reason to doubt any of his testimony. He certainly has a extremely reputable person, he's exposed molesters in the past, and he has been proven to be correct. So given the severity of the allegations, if you read them in the newspaper, I mean, they are horrific. They're talking about a man who not only assaulted girls, he assaulted boys, he assaulted men, I mean, certainly young men, and he assaulted married women, which, although technically may be considered not legally a crime because perhaps technically it was consensual, but certainly he used his position and his charisma to manipulate married women into relationships, which, from what I understand, caused some of them to have broke up their families and to divorce. So given the abhorrent and the perniciousness and the level of psychotic behavior that this man unfortunately exhibited for the last quarter of a century, out of such a psychotic, dual personality, duplicitous individual, I wouldn't trust myself to read the book. I don't know what, especially that these books have very subtle messages in them. I don't even know if he could be aware. Frankly, from what I understand, both, and I think this is very important to point out, Zev, going back to your original point. I don't think it's accurate to say that, and when I mentioned broad stroking B'nai Brak, that all of B'nai Brak sort of all of a sudden turned into his supporters. Number one, Rabbi Silman, who was one of the Rabbi Eliyahu, says that he had his full support. Rabbi Silman was totally supportive of Rabbi Eliyahu and what he had to do. And I also think it's important to know that Yehuda Moshe Silman, who is now the head of Rabbi Karelitz's Beis Din, which is considered the premier Beis Din, they are the gold standard in, quote unquote, the Lithuanian community of the Beis Din. Rav Karelitz was the nephew of the Chazon Ish, who is the founding father of the Lithuanian camp of B'nai Brak. This man is a Ger Chassid. People don't realize he is a Chassid of the Ger Rebbe. However, he learned in Lithuanian style what they call Litvish yeshivas. He's an extreme man of humility, certainly always avoiding the limelight. And he himself, Rabbi Eliyahu claims, I have no reason to doubt this man, that he himself went to CW in an attempt to personally convince him. And honestly, I think at that point he was met with threats and intimidations, and he was in the forefront with Rabbi Eliyahu of this fight to stop this man at all costs from his deeds. So
Rabbi Ron, Yitzchok Eisenman, we want to break. I want to pick up on these points. And
okay.
We're speaking with Rabbi Ron Yitzchok Eisenman. He is the Rav in Passaic, New Jersey, of Congregation Ahavas Israel. He's written a fantastic article regarding the Chaim Walder case. He's written books, Svarim, and we're glad that he joins us tonight. Thank you, Dov Shern, for the latest news in Israel. Our guest is Rabbi Ron Yitzchok Eisenman. He's originally from Brooklyn, New York. He's written the Svarim. He's Rav of Congregation Ahavas Israel in Passaic, New Jersey. His latest book is called Shul with a View. We're looking at the Chaim Walder story. This is the last chapter of the Chaim Walder story. We're going to get to some of your phone calls right now. Okay, let us first go to Stan in Forest Hills. Okay, Stan in Forest Hills, your question for our guest. Go ahead, Stan.
Good morning and Happy New Year to everyone. First, I have to take exception on one or two things that the gentleman has said. One, Mr. Cosby has been released, and it was released because there's some problem in the case that happened, so forth. So that's a separate situation. I don't even know why he brought up Mr. Cosby, Bill Cosby. But about Mein Kampf, as I don't know if you know, but I think It's been done. I know the original publishers of Mein Kampf, whoever they were bought out by whatever, contribute. I think they sell maybe 10 million copies a year or something across. Well, I read it in college and so forth. It was required reading to see what a maniac is like. Anyway, but many of the royalties from Mein Kampf go to Jewish organizations in Germany. Did you know that?
So what's your point, Stan?
The point is, this guy's dead. Let his books publish and give the royalties to the victims of his crime. Get the lists and arrange with the publishers when the thing comes to give the royalties to the victims, all of it. And this way, some way, there can be some reunification to those who were hurt. It'll never.
Okay, let me let Rabbi Ron Eisenman respond to you. Go ahead, Rabbi Eisenman.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you for the question. Obviously, the Mr. Cosby issue is no reason to address. But the second issue about the selling of Mein Kampf, well, obviously, one would first have to consult with the victims. I don't think it's fair, first stand from Forest Hills to comment on what the victims would be satisfied with, what the victims would not be satisfied with. I would, since Mr. Stan seems to be a student of history, I would remind him that nobody less than Menachem Begin brought down just about coming within inches of bringing down the Israeli government in his steadfast opposition to taking blood money from Germany and the Annauer government when that was being passed. So I don't think it's for Mr. Stan or for anybody else for us to decide what should be published and what should be considered compensation or what could be considered proper restitution for those who have been mortally injured for life. So I would rather leave it to the victims themselves to decide as to people in Forest Hills.
Okay, let's go to Carolyn. Go ahead, Carolyn. Your question or comment?
My question is, what does
Carolyn, go ahead.
victim mean?
CW stands for Chaim Walder. CW stands for Chaim Walder. Okay.
Oh, because they have a television station here in New York on Channel 11.
Yeah, we're not talking about Channel 11, but anyway, thank you for your phone call.
See. No, I just didn't understand.
Sure, no, understood.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go to Ben Sion in Midwood. Ben Sion is very patiently waiting. Go ahead, Ben Sion in Midwood.
Yes.
Your question for our guest. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think it was disgusting that Milton Yehoshua balcony tried shouting you down, and
no, we had a discussion, but go ahead.
Okay, the Rashba tried promulgating, and it did succeed among the Sephardim. Unfortunately, the Ashkenazim don't know how to deal with it. He promulgated a klal that when there are no men to testify, and the only ones who've been molested and who can come forward are women and children and young men, that their testimony is acceptable in the Sephardic basin. I guess it will take a long time for our community to acclimate to that, because when government is under the gun, they can do irrational things. For instance, the internment of the Japanese here in America. Eventually, those who were still around, I don't know, it was 10, 20 years ago, were given at least token money to make up for that fiasco.
So you just want to get to the point because we're short of time?
Yeah, what I want to say is your guest is right on the mark, and there may be here, of course, also some mental illness. I think he mentioned that probably the man, the alleged molester, was psychotic. Indeed, that's probably true. That's the essence of my comments.
All right, thank you. Did you want to comment, Rabbi Reisman? Did you want to comment on that?
No, it's Tristan. I appreciate the call. Thank you.
Let me thank you for your phone call. Let's take an email question. Here's an email question from Joseph. According to halacha, if there was no give us edus in a rabbinical court accepting what is said as lashon hara.
So again, obviously, it's not exactly the venue, the forum to delve into the exact particulars and nuances, but I appreciate Joseph's email. But suffice to say that he's incorrect in taking a very simplistic view in what usage of the term Gvias Edus, meaning the testimony of witnesses, is the only means necessary. And within that absence, it becomes Lashon Hara. Unfortunately, he's misinformed in that way. You should advise him. The Chuvas of Rabbi Yoshev Zecher Tzadik Livracha points out, quoting before him, almost 1,000 years before him, the Chuvas of the Rashba, Shlomo ben Aderes, who was the Rav in Barcelona in the late 1200s, early 1300s, who points out very clearly that in the absence of technical aidim, and remind our friends from Midwood, it's very rare, in fact, outright impossible, that a person, before they sodomize a 9-year-old boy, will call over to adult males over 12 years old and make sure that they are witnessing this act of sodomization in order that perhaps later they can testify. So Rav Elzel Yoshev points again out, quoting the Rashba 1,000 years before him, that in that absence, the Rabbanim of the community, especially in the case of what's called a kola de lo pasga, which is allegations which are consistent and they are just keep coming in, de lo pasga, they don't stop. That there are consistent allegations against this individual, that in such a case the Beis Din has the right and the obligation to do what it feels it's right based on their evaluation of the case, well aware of the fact that as children learn in school that there has to be a edus, a testimony in front of the Beis Din, et cetera, et cetera.
But don't you need, Rabbi Eisenman, the testimony from the one that's being alleged against?
You mean, doesn't he have the right to defend himself?
Right, before they make a final determination.
No. So the answer is no. Meaning, first of all, CW was asked to come before the Beis Din last Sunday of Rav Eliyahu in Tzfat, and he declined. Therefore, would be absurd, immoral, and anti-halakhic to assume that just because a person, which in America, of course, a person could be subpoenaed and forced to, but obviously justice can be done in absentia if the defendant refuses to cooperate.
You made a very important point, because there are people alleging that he didn't have an opportunity for his day in court. If he turned down the opportunity, then he can't blame the Beis Din. We have room for one more phone call. We're almost out of time, so let's go to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Your question for Rabbi Eisenman. Go ahead, please.
It's not only Rabbi Eisenman, but Rabbi Balkan. He said he didn't have his day in court. They had tapes of him. He was saying things and he did things on tapes. They had taped him when he did this disgraceful act. So there was an appearance of him there by his words and his actions. And they had to stop any further opportunities for others. They were trying to save others, and many people were saved because of this when it came into the open.
I'm going to let Rabbi Eisenman respond to you.
I think our friend from the Lower East Side, he's got the Lower East Side on the mark mentality. He's got a bullseye there, exactly on target. This man was a predator for over a quarter of a century. There are countless victims that have come forth giving credible testimony. As mentioned, and there's this ridiculous accusation, which is people have told me that the tapes have been altered or somehow artificially manufactured, is absurd. There are tapes of him speaking to these women, telling them to not testify. There's absolutely not a shred of doubt that this man committed these acts.
All right, thank you. Anyway, thank you for your phone. We're out of time, so we're out of time, so I appreciate your phone call, but thank you. Anyway, I want to thank Rabbi Ron Yitzchok Eisenman, and we'll take more phone calls later on. Rabbi Ron Yitzchok Eisenman, originally from Brooklyn, he's now Rav of Congregation Ahavas Israel in Passaic, New Jersey. He's written some fascinating books. I urge you to get them. His latest one is called The Shul with a View from Art Scroll. We appreciate your being here with us. Look forward to having you back. Continued success, and I really want to have you. We really want to have you back again, Rabbi Eisenman, because I think you have a fresh voice, that you're not afraid to speak out and articulate, and I think we need more. We need more of that in our community. We need more voices such as yourself in the community. So, Rabbi Ron Eisenman, thank you for joining us on the radio.
Thank you so much, Zev. It would be my pleasure. And again, I want to stress again, There's zero personal vendetta against CW. This is only and exclusively to protect, as the caller mentioned, more children, more adults from being abused, which is our primary concern. And I thank you, Zev, for the time.
Thank you so much. We look forward to having you back. We look forward to having you back on a future broadcast. Thank you, Rabbi Ron Eisenman.
Thank you.
Okay, when we come back, we continue the conversation of looking at what happened in the case, the final chapter